Cross purposes. Now, here's a thing not many Christians know. For the first 3 centuries of the Christian era, before the church got into bed with the state, or perhaps the state co-opted the church as its religious arm, the cross did not feature at all in Christian art, neither with nor without a crucified Jesus hanging on it. Instead, the most popular image of Jesus was as the Good Shepherd carrying a sheep on his shoulders, closely followed by images of saints and martyrs. The cross only began to feature in Christian iconography after the Roman Emperor Constantine made Christianity legal, though not yet compulsory. That came later. Why should this be? I have a number of thoughts. First, during this period, crucifixion was still being used as a method of execution by Romans. In fact, it was only outlawed by Constantine out of respect for the church. To be crucified was still a thing of shame, a public disgrace, let alone a very nasty way to die. For artists to make art portraying this ghastly instrument of torture would have been equivalent to today's women and men wearing a gold-plated gallows around our necks on a chain. Yes, by the time Paul was writing, very early after Jesus' death and resurrection, the cross had become a sign of God's glory and love for us in dying for us. But that did not make crucifixion any less of a horror. It was simply a horror that God had used to save us and had transformed by the resurrection. Actually, strictly speaking, it's not the cross that is the good news. It's Jesus rising from death after suffering it, so demonstrating that his death at their hands had vanquished the powers of evil. Secondly, once this peculiarly cruel form of punishment had been outlawed, and it was peculiarly cruel, victims died by suffocation when they could no longer raise themselves up on the cross to breathe in, hence the mercy of breaking their legs to ensure a swifter death. It became available as a symbol of Christ's salvific death for us, a visual shorthand for the good news of redemption. But I think there is more to it than this. For the early centuries, Jesus' death was that of a theological and political rebel, executed to prevent a religio-political uprising in his name. However, once Christianity had become a state religion, the radical teaching and life of Jesus was inconvenient for the powers that be. The cross of Jesus, therefore, needed to be presented not as the elimination by the empire of a troublesome radical. After all, the church was now an adjunct of the empire, but as a theological transaction between an all-powerful God and sinful individuals. In this form, it was now safe to use it as a symbol of the faith that had become a way of creating good citizens of empire. And another thing, the story of Constantine's conversion is that in the midst of battle, he saw a vision of the cross and heard, internally or audibly, the words, "In this sign you will conquer." He went on to win the war and concluded that this was Christ's doing. But what if he totally misinterpreted his vision? After all, in the time before Christendom, the church was almost uniformly pacifist, following its master who had taught his disciples not to repay evil with evil or violence with violence. "It is not lawful for me to fight," was the defense of male Christians who refused to be conscripted into the Roman army. What if what God was really saying to Constantine with that vision was that the non-violent spirit, teaching and death of Jesus was the way for him to conquer, rather than by force of arms? But Constantine, schooled in the ways of a military power, taught the cross to be a sign of superior religious and political force. If I'm right, then the cross we wear and venerate today is a severely eviscerated form of what it symbolised for the first Christians. With or without what a Woolworths jewellery customer is reputed to have called a little man on it, the cross in art or personal adornment has been stripped of its monstrosity, its status as a gruesome punishment, not just for any sort of criminal, but specifically for those who threatened by their words and actions and by their acquisition of followers the status quo of the earthly powers. Nowadays, the cross is a visual equivalent of John 3:16, not a fate so awful that artists balked at portraying it. As an interesting sideline, it's worth noting that in the Byzantine Empire, the continuation of the eastern arm of the Roman Empire, when its western incarnation had already fallen, the crucifixion is less common in art, replaced by the image of Christ Pantocrator, the ruler of all. Did some remnant of the shame of the cross perhaps linger in the minds of the Byzantines? Or have they created a kind of conglomerate of the earthly all-powerful emperor and the heavenly one? I don't know enough of the history to tell, and maybe that would deserve an article of its own. In any case, should this history lead us to re-examine the place of the cross in our art, and perhaps even our theology, and even take steps to recover its meaning as a place of cursedness? Cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree, Galatians 3:13. At least in this country, where hanging has long been outlawed, a gallows may hold less of the threat it once did. But I wonder, what conversations and reflections might it provoke if Christians took to wearing not a gold, silver or wooden cross around our necks, but a small gold-plated electric chair?